an NBA champion, an Olympic champion, an all-star, and with some of his best years ahead of him at just 25 years old. And getting a chance to see him in a Celtic uniform. Are there any questions?
Yes, we have a lot of questions, Mr. Ainge. Why did you call that conference call like 10 minutes after the trade was agreed upon in principle? I was wondering that at the time myself, and here we are live. Today is Sunday, August 27th, 2017. Literally a very rare live episode of Celtics Beat, episode number 224, presented by FanDuel. Here with Chris Forsberg for real. Now, Chris, I mentioned on our now what's looking like a lost episode. We may release that, by the way, but I actually had a little questions of how that came together so fast, and we were talking on our prior episode that could be lost in the abyss of even the Garnett trade was not announced. It took time. A lot of times when the Celtics acquire players, they say, "Hey, we can't talk about X player or Y player until all the I's and T's are crossed." It was it was interesting that like I said on our lost episode, that came together real quick.
Have they formally introduced Gordon Hayward yet? Remember how long it took that one to be finalized?
Well, he had a conference call, though. Gordon Hayward had a conference call.
Yeah, but even that was some 2.5 weeks after he had finally signed. They're usually very diligent. As in that situation, we knew they wanted to make sure every T was crossed, I was dotted before they talked about Gordon Hayward. It was unique, and I can't necessarily explain it. I don't know if there was a confidence on Boston's end that, hey, this is what was agreed upon, and this isn't going to fall through. I think you have good faith in your trading partner that they know what's happening. But listen, they've hit a quite the bump here, and we were hoping maybe we could finagle a way to just massage the corners of that podcast that will live in the internet abyss, but we think it's going to be a little bit of a standoff here, right? So you can't just code it. It's going to be interesting to see how the next few days drag out.
Audio from said conference call was taken from, of course, youtube.com/CLNS Media, youtube.com/CLNS Media. I want to get into the whole logistics of the ins and the outs, and someone who is very involved in this process is your colleague, Adrian Wojnarowski, who you can't say too much about, largely because of the corporate shackles that I don't want to get into. But we'll probably just discuss everything there. But this episode will be released live on Sunday. It's going live right now, and we will listen to on demand throughout the week by many of our dearest of listeners. So we are going to do a if the trade goes through type, and if it doesn't go through, first off, we'll do, I guess, the good part first. If this trade does not go through, and we're going to get into this later, I think it's disastrous for the Celtics. Everyone will reference, Rondo, Chris Paul, they'll go to that something. Rondo came back. He was a little bit of a pro. The team wins the Houston Conference Finals. We'll get into that later. Let's start off with the good, because when we recorded 36, 48 hours ago, we were under the assumption that the trade was pretty much done. We even knew what number KYRIE IRVING was going to wear for the Celtics. Like that, he was even done. That part. But me and you, as we were discussing, were in the minority. Seemed to be the general consensus of not just Celtics fans, but the national NBA media, or anyone following the basketball, was Boston gave up too much. Now, we don't know if a potential deal does happen, what else is going to be included in the trade, but under the logistics to what they were agreed to, me and you both loved it. We gave a variety of reasons, but for me, I guess the one that jumps right out, KYRIE IRVING is the best player in this trade. And usually, when you acquire the best player in the trade, rule of thumb is you win the trade.
And that's the way you have to look at it. And you know what I think is most interesting? It sort of tells how the tide has maybe turned a little bit on how fans are viewing this, is that if it had come out that night that Cleveland all of a sudden was leery about Isaiah's hip, Celtics fans would have been sitting here going, yes, reverse this. Like, whatever you got to do to make sure this doesn't go through. But over the course of that maybe next 24, 48 hours after the trade went official, I felt like Celtics fans kind of started to, look at it, take the emotion out of it, the way Danny Ainge viewed it, and kind of started to embrace it. And so now I think there is a little bit of, almost panic among Celtics fans, like, not only would it be awkward and that whole thing, but Celtics fans have started to picture their future with Kyrie Irving and realize, this is probably the better path forward because it gives you more talent, more top-level talent that can sort of get you to that next level. And, that's what this whole summer was about. I go back to what Danny Ainge told Steve Bulpett in the Herald right after the Celtics season ended. He said, we have good players. We need great players. And so while the Celtics gave up a lot in this deal, and that, the whole idea of, I'm not calling Isaiah Thomas just a good player. I don't know what the right classification there is, but I think if we're being honest, Kyrie Irving is a better player and a player that has a better chance to be a great player deeper into the future and get this team to where it desires to go. And so, yeah, I think if this trade ultimately goes through, and regardless of what they have to do to get it to the finish line, while they paid a steep price, you will still look back on this trade and say the Celtics got the best player involved and the player with the best chance to get them where they want to go.
There's a higher, so this is what we said on the previous show, which we may or may not release. I'm actually tempted to release it maybe at the middle of the week, especially if this trade does happen. But this is what we did say. We're both very concerned that, listen, we had Mike Gorman here on last week's show. It was basically, hey, brand new team, there are going to be early season struggles, and that this was even before this trade for Kyrie Irving, or this potential trade for Kyrie Irving. Therefore, there was going to be, once again, more Brad Stevens lineup experimentation, which could lead to a lot of early season losses, as has been the case in prior years. Now, you get Kyrie Irving, it's going to be 4 new starters, but nonetheless, there would be a higher ceiling for that team, and a higher ceiling for a longer time. As we said on last week's show, as we said actually on our lost show that was never released, was, that was the best Isaiah Thomas was going to give you. And, of course, now the whole thing, this is going to be a topic specifically dedicated to, is the whole hip issue. But Kyrie Irving has been Kyrie Irving for 4 or 5 years. That Isaiah Thomas was that Isaiah Thomas for about a year.
Exactly, and that's what you keep coming back to, is that, as mesmerizing as Isaiah's season was last year, I think we all sat here, and said, like, what are the possibilities that he maintains that? And listen, like, it's hard to bet against Isaiah because for 2.5 seasons...
Oh, we all had questions, and he kept proving us wrong for 2.5 years.
Exactly. And so listen, would it surprise me if he goes out and finds a way to average 28 points, even though he's playing next to LeBron James? No. Like, Isaiah is going to have a whole lot of motivation here. But again, and we'll get into the hip, but, you're a little bit leery there. You're leery about the payday that looms next summer when he's 29 and committing big money to a little guy. One of the things we really stressed in that episode was how little guys take a lot of punishment. And fair or not, the lifespan of a 5'9" guard in this league, and a 5'9" guard who likes to go inside and crash into big bodies, is even shorter. And so, again, if Isaiah played the 40, would I be surprised? No, but in this game of basketball, it's all about, and I think especially with the Celtics, they know this, with Zarin and their front office, they are really good at risk management. They are really good at identifying the best chances, the best opportunities going forward. And as cold as it is, and as ruthless as this business is, Kyrie Irving is going to give them a better chance moving forward, and ultimately that's all it comes down to. It's like there's nothing else beyond that, and that's why you pay a big ransom to get him here. I got a chance in between when we taped that first episode and now to talk to Brad on Friday, and you could sense the excitement. Like, he was waiting for the emotional sting to wear off, but, you could see it in his eyes. Like, he finally has elite players. And one of those elite players, Gordon Hayward, is a guy who he obviously has a relationship. So there's a lot of excitement. It's going to take some time for the sting to wear off. That Band-Aid's going to peel a little bit slower now because of what they're going through here. But I do think ultimately this thing gets done and Brad gets a chance to play with some real elite talent.
So I was most concerned if and when this trade does happen and they get Kyrie. I think the defense is going to take another step back. Oddly enough, you said no. Offensively, I really wasn't worried at all. I think that, if Brad Stevens has floor spacing, which they're going to maintain in the starting lineup regardless, bench is going to be an issue, and that's something that we harped upon in that lost episode many a times. But I think Kyrie just fills that Isaiah Thomas role right out of the gate and then some. And as long as Brad Stevens has floor space to work with, I am not worried about the offense one iota.
Yeah, you're exactly right, because here's what Brad said, the same thing pretty much. He said, he's worried, like, how is 11 new faces going to work together, but he's pretty confident that regardless of how the starting lineup ultimately looks, and, we can throw around all the potential starting two guards with Jalen or Marcus or Terry Rozier, whoever wants to earn that job, they'll figure that out. But Brad is confident that with Kyrie, with Al Horford, with Gordon Hayward on the floor, that offense is going to go, and they're going to figure things out, and they complement each other, and it's going to work together. There's a little bit more concern about how things work when you get to the second unit, and that's where staggering Gordon Hayward with Kyrie Irving and making sure you have one sort of elite ball handler, creator on the floor will be important.
That'll be Marcus Smart, and that's why you keep Marcus Smart on the bench. I know that's
exactly.
That's a point you make for another show, but I mean, I should bring it up there astutely.
I mean, that's another luxury, right? And that's another. It goes back to when they were doing the initial sort of roster shuffling, and everyone's sitting there going, "Man, why did they move Avery Bradley?" Well, I'm not saying they had the foresight to know that that they were going to need Marcus's ball handling, but I think we understood that it's important to have that guy who can create. And listen, like, Marcus might eventually make that jump. I'm not saying he's going to be a go-to offensive guy who knocks down 40% of his shots, but if he can continue to learn how to direct the offense, and again, when you put more talent out there with a point guard, it just naturally leads to good things. So I agree. I think the early assessment would be Marcus sort of staying in that role, but he should also be motivated. The longest tenured Celtic is going to hear all this stuff about how he should remain in that six-man role, and maybe a bit like Isaiah Thomas, will be motivated to go out there and show that maybe he's ready for a bit more of a bigger role. But either way, we know Marcus is important to this team. Defensively, I go back to what I said on that episode.
Go ahead.
No, it was just while I am likewise concerned, I think back to last season when we were like so sure the Celtics were going to be, and I'll go as far as to say I think we even said in our the Celtics will have the best defense in the league. Adding Al Horford to that back.
Yeah, I said that last year.
I said, so what's going to happen this year is going to be the exact opposite. We're going to all sit here and fret about the defense and how are they going to figure this out, and Kyrie is still a liability and all this, and then they're going to go out there and somehow, some way, they will be a top 10, top 8 defense. And I don't know how that happens, and that's going to take some serious Brad Stevens wizardry, but there's something in my gut tells me that they're going to figure out a way. And I just think last season there was these instances where they were so focused on the offense, both on how easy it came with Isaiah on the floor and how hard it was when he wasn't, that there was just, for whatever reason, there was lapses. And I don't know if, one of the things, again, about elite players is they find a way to not go with those ebbs and flows, those highs and lows. They just do what they do. And I think there's a better chance this year that the defense is more consistent and that just somehow that they find a way to be a good defensive team. And listen, the rebound is still going to be an issue. They still zero cares about defense. I mean, about rebounding. But I just feel like this team has a chance to still be an adequate defensive team.
Yeah, see, I just think defensively that's just going to be a familiarity issue. There's really no quarterback. I guess Al Horford can somewhat qualify that, but he's a little slow. But there really aren't enough. I think that just simply goes back to all the players that are here together. They just haven't spent enough time together, of course, once again. Pending said Kyrie Irving trade goes through. I'll make sort of, this is what, and we talked about this on, I hate referencing that. I'm going to almost have to put that show out on, say, the middle of the week. And now we seriously do hope and pray that trade does go through, especially since we keep referencing it. But I really believe that there is going to be a Russell Westbrook theory with Kyrie Irving.
And I think I can see that potential. I don't know if it'll necessarily manifest itself. The thing to me is that the Russell Westbrook syndrome happened because, not that he didn't have other players around him, but he didn't have other superstars. It was almost a necessity for him to every night go out there and be the guy. And same thing with James Harden, sort of. Things will change in Houston this year because Chris Paul will have the ball more, and Harden's stat line can't be quite what it is. Will it be very good? Yes. I just still think there's a natural tendency when multiple stars come together that has to defray a little bit. That's why you always see guys, MVP odds drop. Although Kyrie spiked, but we can understand that because LeBron is such a prohibitive top favorite there that he can't possibly be as high in the odds. Now that in Boston those jump up a little bit, but he's still going to have to share production with Al, even though his stat line doesn't jump off the page, but more so with Gordon Hayward. I do see a situation where you have a player here who has essentially requested to be moved from his team, to be removed from the shadow of LeBron James, and he should be relentlessly motivated to prove why he did that, to prove that he had the stones to do that,
right,
but could also back it up.
The antithesis of Kevin Durant. And even, I guess, the 2011 LeBron James, where everybody went out and, crushed for doing this. Hey, this is a guy who actually wants to do it on his, I'm not say on his own, but sort of be the face of the most historic franchise in the sport.
And I thought it was interesting that Kevin comes out and actually applauded him for that. And, that same thing, I think it was funny to see everyone sort of point out the irony in it. But, no, I think that's a good thing for Boston. I think that's a part of the reason they were willing to make this trade. A lot of what we talked about was about how crazy it is that two rivals in the Eastern Conference are making this blockbuster deal, essentially swapping all-stars.
Yeah,
if you take LeBron out of it.
We said it was historic.
It really is, but you know why Danny Ainge is not only because does he think it's better for the future of the franchise, but I think he looks at Kyrie and he says there's a little bit of Isaiah Thomas in him in the sense that he's going to have this chip on his shoulder despite the status of his team, and he's going to want to go out there and prove everybody wrong, and they're going to, and especially on the 4 regular season games and then 7 times in the playoffs, he's going to have someone who wants to go out there and beat the Cavs more than anyone else in the NBA, and it's going to be interesting to see if Kyrie embraces that and how he's able to take his game to another level. I do think, there's definitely that notion that he's going to, his status as a player in the NBA will go forward, whether that's muscling him into the top 5, top 8, whatever it might be. I don't think it'll be as pronounced as maybe a Harden or a Westbrook, but I do think there'll be a jump. And I think, NBA players already love Kyrie, but there's a very good chance they will say, wow, this guy really impacts the game when he's on the floor and further embrace what he brings because of being the alpha here.
Yeah, you brought that up. There is no precedent in sports of this type of trade happening where two teams that were clearly at the top of their conference traded players that were as significant as they were. Isaiah, basically, who was the best player on his own team. Kyrie Irving was the second best player on his own team. It's not even in the NBA where, as we see many star players get traded in the NBA, it's likely from a rebuilding team or a team, moving on, trying to rebuild to a team that wants to be a contender, be it, say, the Barkley trade, Will Chamberlain, Pau Gasol, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Kevin Garnett, as a matter of fact. That's usually rebuilding team to contender / team that wants to be contender. I mean, you almost never see a trade, which may or may not happen, that we did possibly see this past Tuesday. Anyways, we are going to have to shift to the now more depressing possibilities. But before we do, I have a great note that I need to pass along to my audience to cheer everybody up before we do. And that is that the wait is nearly over because fantasy football is back and football is back, which means FanDuel is back. Fantasy football fans, for everyday fans, new contests starting every week, no busted seasons. Sign up today, go to FanDuel.com, click the Join Now button, and use my code CelticsBeat. That's CelticsBeat, all one word. The very own Celtics Beat Listener League will begin in Week 1, which is the week of the 10th of September. Join now, of course, by going to FanDuel.com/CelticsBeat. I have been advised to give a suggestion, so I will give said hint as to whom I like if you do play against me. NFL Kickoff 2017. So the Patriots hang the banner, another one of those things, those Thursday night games. And yes, Kansas City, they sport one of the stoutest defenses in the NFL, so that's all the better in my eyes. You can get Tom Brady at the cheapest price you can get him for all year. As I believe, Chris, the emotion from that night is going to provide the boost for a huge night from the Patriots offense. They've usually had some big nights offensively. I don't know if you remember when they opened Gillette for the first time against the Steelers. That was still one of Brady's career games when he slinged it around 50 times. So, we'll wrap it here. Try FanDuel for free with no deposit required. Visit FanDuel.com to claim your free contest and play for a share of $10,000 to sign up using promo code CelticsBeat. That's FanDuel.com, promo code CelticsBeat, void where prohibited. Okay, here we go.
Way to go out on a limb there.
I know. Tom Brady. I like Brady. It's Brady, though, against the KC defense, and it's usually it's at a cheaper price than you're going to get, say, Tom Brady against, give me some Patsy defense. I don't know, like Buffalo or whatever, some team that he usually throws 5 touchdowns against. Okay, so I used the word disastrous earlier in the show. If this trade does, if Cleveland, there's 2 options, I guess, that could happen. The Celtics could throw in a significant asset. God forbid the Lakers pick. They could throw in another asset, like something at the end of the first round, one of their picks, which I can speak for you in this, saying, yeah, of course, sign me up right here. But if there is a doomsday scenario, and the longer this thing drags on, the more I think that this is, this is a possibility, and I'm gonna get pretty. I use the word disastrous. Give me an adjective of something like that. If this thing is blown up in everyone's face,
unfathomable. I really can't even wrap my head around it, and I know it's a possibility, but I love the expression people keep using. The toothpaste is out of the tube. It's like I just don't know how you go backwards. I think they're in too deep. I do think we're in for a standoff here, and if I'm Danny Ainge, I look at what I'm giving up and I say, yeah, no. But if they want to let this thing drag out, and I think it will. I think it'll go whatever the deadline is, Thursday or
Wednesday or Thursday, something like that.
Yeah, I just see it like, who will crack first.
Now, I'm going to jump in. Is that not a little, I'll say, classless on Cleveland's part? I mean, you agreed to a deal in principle, and this is where I'm going to now you're probably going to have to jump around a little bit, but Adrian Wojnarowski has pretty much served as a press secretary for the CAVS during this whole process. He puts out a tweet 4 days ago. I retweeted it from the Celtics beat account. Cleveland has no short-term concerns on Thomas's health. No surgery was needed on the hip. Cavs are getting motivated All-Star in contract year. That did not come from a selectman from the city of Cleveland. That obviously came from someone from the Cavs organization. Now this is also what's very interesting about the wording from Woj. We have never heard of the phrase yet, failed physical. It is just after the physical, blah, blah. We have never heard of failed physical. So is this now... I do not think Cleveland is doing this in good faith. Let's do something that I guess we can correlate to. 25 years ago when we were trading baseball cards, and I said, here's a Griffey, rookie card for, Randy Johnson and Jay Buhner. And he said, all right, yeah, sure, done. You didn't then go home and say, oh, you know what, I'm going to renege. If you kind of,
I had friends who did that. And
they weren't my friends any longer. I shoved their teeth so far down their throat. I mean, they'd be, Go ahead.
No, I think what happened here, and it's pretty transparent that they understood. They probably got to look at his medical records and sat there and said, all right, this doesn't seem so bad. And then for whatever reason, once he got in there and they took a look, and I do think there's a little bit of, just like the Celtics fans digesting the trade. Cleveland sits there and says, first year GM, and maybe I don't know if they start second guessing a little bit, but all of a sudden it's like, well, what if he misses some time here? How does this deal look? And I do think it's a unique situation, certainly not unprecedented. I've thought all along that it's been just a little weird with the whole Isaiah situation, from the fact that he hasn't made a lot of comments about it other than to say that his rehab has been going okay. Danny came out at various times after they did a bunch of these checkups.
Yeah, and it was not a rah-rah, Isaiah's going to be great, we can't wait. I mean, there was a lot for us to be skittish. So I thought the Celtics were very open, or as open as they possibly could be about his hip. Ainge even in said conference call talked about how the hip sort of went into the trade. So they were not. This is not a San Diego Padres Drew Pomeranz type thing.
Exactly.
They were flagrantly lying about his health.
Part of me wonders if there's any way they can, as part of this negotiation, and even if all else fails, is there a way to structure something where you say, okay, the compensation will be based on the number of games Isaiah plays? Like, isn't that the fairest way to do it? Like, okay, if you're really concerned about Isaiah, we say the Celtics told them that he might miss the start of the year, but we think he'll be back in November and we'll play 50 games, 55 games. Set a number, and if he doesn't reach it, then the compensation goes up from a top 55 protected second round pick to some second round pick that they got or something. But I can't imagine Danny Ainge being willing to go any further than that. And as much as he's going to want to get this deal to the finish line, there's just a bit of principle here, because you don't just, when that friend comes crying back about not wanting that Jay Buhner card anymore, you say, maybe think of that next time. And that's a lesson to learn.
Right. I mean, if Cleveland reneges on this, I still would like to think that they won't. And I think even having this situation as far as it is, Danny's never going to make a move with that, Kobe Altman character again. And Danny's as connected in the league as anybody who has, phenomenal relationships from a lot of people, as we know. He can. I don't want to say he will, but I know I'd be telling some of my quote-unquote friends, I won't even urinate on this guy if he's on fire from now on, and neither should you.
I know. And again, it's hard to know because we don't know what's going on inside. It might be more cordial than we think. But I do think, regardless, there's going to be hurt feelings here because you hate that this stuff goes public. And this is why the Celtics are so great about keeping everything under wrap. They so rarely...
And it was Cleveland who put this out because it was Woj who broke this story, and it was Woj who was telling everyone that this is happening, that's happening, and that was all coming from Cleveland's camp because it does not come from the Celtics to Woj.
The Celtics are very tight-lipped about their processes and what they go through, and there have been instances where they've been burnt. JaVale McGee was signed and then unsigned, and there's no, it's not.
I wouldn't call it being burnt. JaVale McGee, that's not a good reference, but go ahead.
But it happens, and hey, listen, there's a lot of people at play here. There's agents. There's plenty of places that these things can come out of, and. But yet we certainly know that teams, put out there what they need to put out there. I think ultimately, I just can't. Again, I go back to my first word, unfathomable. I don't see a scenario in which this does not get to the finish line, and I can't see the Celtics
What's scary is since me and you are Celtics fans, and a good portion of the audience that is listening to this show are Celtics fans. As much as we want to be critical and saying that Cleveland, it seems like they're not really doing this in good faith, there is also way more pressure on the Celtics to get a deal done. Cleveland can say, listen, we're kind of moving on from Kyrie anyways. We'll just turn right around and just take whatever the highest bidder gives us for Irving before the start of the season.
Does that highest bidder get them a 2018 unprotected Brooklyn Nets pick? Does it get them Jay Crowder? I mean, I just don't think there's a deal out there. We're sitting here in the days after, and some people are saying
we didn't think that with Jimmy Butler or all these other potential Celtics. Paul George, and we all said, oh, geez, Boston could have beat that. Boston could have beat this. We've seen enough now over the last 14 months of other teams, quote unquote, beating a Boston offer or a potential Boston offer on a certain trade. So I'm not going to.
What do you think happens if let's say doomsday hits and they don't make this deal? They get rescinded and everyone's going to kind of slink back to their teams. What happens with Isaiah?
You don't want to know. There's we can hear. This is what you're going to hear: Danny Ainge, Brad Stevens, and Isaiah come out and say, "Well, part of the business." Blah blah blah. You'll see a lot of references to Rondo and Chris Paul. How. Now that trade never was completed, but the Celtics were very open about their interest in Chris Paul and their interest in trading Rondo for Chris Paul. It is tough to wrap your head around. Isaiah Jay even coming back too, because he's been spending the last 6 months on Twitter or any type of social media talking about, oh, they don't want me, the Celtics fans this, blah 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 blah. But let's reference the Lost Show again. We were talking about how that specific group that came together after the Rondo trade to Dallas in 2015 and Jay Crowder started playing more, up until the Eastern Conference Finals loss, how that team had kind of carved out its own niche in Celtics history. That group relied on its kind of the bonding internally. I like to think that will not be there anymore.
Yeah, and I think you have to think it that way. This is just a new team, and it has to forge its own identity. And Brad told me on Friday.
I'm talking about Isaiah coming back. And Jay coming back too, because those were two. Avery Bradley as well. Those were the emotional guys that's really held that.
Even if those two guys were to come back, while I think that keeps a little bit of that the sort of identity of the team and sort of that under the radar, blue collar. But I don't know. I just don't see it. It's so hard to wrap my head around. I just can't even fathom it. I do think Brad and Danny being sort of excellent sort of spin controllers and being able to get their players back on the right page. I think they could do it.
you're going to hear so much of, we talked to Isaiah, he's a pro, he understands this is a business, and then Isaiah will come out in front of the media, in front of Saints, he'll repeat the company, especially since he is a free agent at the end of the year himself, and he's going to go, I'm a pro, blah, 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 it's part of the business, we understand, yada, yada, yada. But
and
now,
then they would trade him again.
Well, I just don't see that type of emotional energy that we saw from Isaiah last year. Now I said this too after his sister died. And that's something that's far more extreme than something like this. But nonetheless, I don't see the psychological impact that could have on someone.
It goes back unfathomable. Well, let's hope we release the episode midweek and we hear us breaking down the trade from all angles. It's again, it just can't fathom that it gets to that point, and I just think that eventually that cooler heads will prevail. They'll figure this thing out, and each team will head on into what will be if it wasn't a fascinating trade already, they will remain intertwined as their path to hopefully an Eastern Conference final showdown lays itself out.
You know what's really frustrating? One of the many things that is very frustrating about this process is the type of hit that Isaiah Thomas's trade value has taken during these last 2 days.
And I agree. I think, one thing I think, especially during trades that people put way too much thought into is, like, if a guy's going to miss a little bit of time, like, how much does that impact a deal, or like how much compensation should the Cavs get if he misses a month? Like, he's a free agent to be. If we're being honest, as part of this deal, there's other assets that I think are potentially more important. Jay Crowder is under contract for a longer time. The Nets pick is going to be vital to both whether they can add another star or add a young player that could keep LeBron interested. I just feel like I feel awful for Isaiah because it really does. You sort of look at him as like damaged goods now, and that's just not fair.
I know, it's unbelievable. He's like an expiring contract out of nowhere. He just literally, over the course of 48 hours, an MVP candidate has been degraded into an expiring contract.
And part of me sits here and says that that's a bad thing for the Celtics, because if this thing goes through, it's
terrible.
Not even just in terms of like his value and stuff, but if this deal does go through, like, now he's got the Isaiah Thomas motivation meter has exploded, and it's gushing the fluid that was in it, because he's going to be really motivated again to prove prove us all wrong again, and that we're sitting here saying, well, can he come back from a hip injury and little guys, and he's going to have the motivation to go out there. The other end of the worry extreme, I guess, is what if he doesn't? And so again, it's a delicate situation, and I do feel bad, because you wonder if this had never happened, how do things play out differently, and how is he embraced further, and listen, those are all the what ifs you can do for all players in the league, but man, you just feel bad that all of a sudden this hip is looming over Isaiah so heavily.
Well, I'll finish I'll make a point on this, and once again, I said on the lost episode, is I'd say one of the primary reasons why I didn't think the Celtics initially gave up much. I'm not going to say much, but I thought Jay Crowder was a huge piece in the deal, of course, the Nets pick, is I actually initially believed, and this was before, people like Mike Petraglia, CLNS Media, put out tweets like he hasn't been able to jog or run at all this summer, is I personally thought that Isaiah Thomas's trade value, as it was, even coming off an MVP candidate type season, a player who wants a contract that both me and you, and likely the Celtics as well, would not have given him, and you get, say, 3-4 months from now, you then run the risk of, quote-unquote, losing him for nothing. That is one of the many reasons as to why I love the trade initially as much as I did, and of course, I really hope that this does go through. But of course, there is going to be a point where you say, you know what, no, hardball, we're not doing it. So what is sort of GM Chris Forsberg, what is the maximum that you would give up to make this potential trade, to get it, as you've been saying, to the finish line?
Until 2 hours before whatever that deadline ends up being, it's nothing.
Ooh,
and I let them stew. Let them sweat. And maybe they can dig in and feel the same way, and maybe GM Chris Forsberg starts sweating a little bit.
I know.
By Thursday at 10 p.m. But if it's much more than a second-round pick or some sort of heavily protected.
I think you definitely have to give up the first rounder. I would definitely consider 2 more first-round picks. That is not that Lakers pick. Chris, I do not think that not going through was an option here for the Celtics, unfortunately.
I mean, I start to try to talk myself into Boston's first-round pick this year or next year, which is going to be whatever, 25 to 30.
I'd consider at least 2 more firsts. And at the same time, I'd also, without saying it to him, I'd say, Kobe, please lose my cell phone. You will never speak or do anything with me again. Thank you very much.
That's why I think that there has to be it would make more sense to wait. The Celtics are already giving up a lot. I think if you're Danny Ainge, you say, listen, I understand why you're concerned, but it's an uncertainty. We don't know what Isaiah's status is moving forward, and this deal was negotiated in good faith knowing that there was an issue. So unless there's some sort of contingency to it based on playing time, which would, you think back, it wasn't like that. They had to go to the league and complain about Oklahoma City and whether they knew about Jeff Green's heart condition. Even in that instance, the Celtics only got a second-round pick out of it. I do think there's a precedence for structuring it so that it's based on what happens during that season. But I don't know. Like, as much as and I understand why GM Larry H. Russell wants to get this thing to the finish line, I just don't think in this situation you can panic and say, all right, because it sets a bad precedence. Because then I think people around the league are going to say, well, what if that happens again? Like, I think at that point the league's got to step in and be like, no. Like, they need to do their own little investigation because it'll happen again. It's unfortunate, but this is a copycat league, and if teams see that as a way to start getting a little bit more out of teams, it'll manifest itself like that. I don't know. I think they dig in here. I think we're in for a little bit of a standoff, and if at the finish line, if I'm exasperated because I can't sort of enjoy my summer, then GM Chris Forsberg says, okay, the second round pick at the best, and then we're done. And just like you said, it's gonna have some bruised feelings.
Hey, real quick, I need to know this, by the way. Real quick. The Isaiah Thomas jersey burning. Is this the Gulf of Tonkin? Do we know that these were Celtics fans that actually did this, or is this some random account that says, oh my God, flaming Celtics jersey, this must be Celtics fans who've done this. Classless Celtics fans, how dare they?
Yeah, it's probably the latter.
That was shady, wasn't it?
And listen, in this
LeBron
age
did
where...
LeBron did it. I want to put it past him.
In this age when everyone wants to be a social media star, it's infuriating that, and listen, we're guilty. I'm sure if I had been the first one to find that, I would have retweeted it. I would have been like, look, I would have called it stupid, but at least, it is noteworthy. It's unfortunate that we let one knucklehead sort of try to explain how Boston felt about the deal.
I don't think so. Not me. Not over here.
Well, but no, and I don't think so. But that's the perception, unfortunately.
Yeah.
That when that starts going viral,
you got enough Twitter followers. Fix it.
That's what we did, and I think God bless the guy who came out with the video, and as really it was just a takeoff of the Kyrie Irving Cleveland thing, but who threw the pieces of paper on top of the jersey, and they all said loving words about Isaiah. That was great to see because that almost needed to happen.
Chris Forsberg, Celtics beat reporter for ESPN. Follow Chris on Twitter at ESPN Forsberg. And that'll do it for today's episode of Celtics Beat, which was presented by FanDuel. Go to FanDuel.com/CelticsBeat to join the official Celtics Beat FanDuel Fantasy Football League. Want to thank everyone who tuned in to yet another week, particularly those early risers who had some patience on the later release of this week's show. Nonetheless, it was out there and presented live. Music was provided by Chuck Dietz and Steph Legrateau. For CLNS founder Nick Gelso, this is Larry H. Russell, the executive producer and host of the #1 Celtics podcast on the web, powered by CLNS Media.